In the US, they spend, on average, 5 hours a day doing it. In the UK, it's closer to 4. Chances are we in Ireland are somewhere in between. We're talking about time spent watching television. But just how we're watching TV is changing, and that's leading to a whole new world, for better or for worse. Diane Negra and Roddy Flynn join me to negotiate what we're calling the new TV frontier. So, would you start, Dan? How would you define, if you had to put a simple term on it, how have we changed the way we watch television from, say, 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I think if I had to isolate one thing, it probably would be the ready accessibility of downloading and the fact that we don't necessarily work to television schedule. We expect it to come to us in a different way. So the old notion of the fixed object in the side of the living room has become dispersed. It becomes something that we often sort of watch through a laptop and things like that. So I think TV has a different status in terms of our sense of its accessibility and our sense of time in relation to TV as well.
In fact, the fixed item in the living room isn't the box in the corner, it's the box set up on the bookshelf.
Absolutely, and it now has that kind of status of that I think leather-bound volumes used to have. It was a kind of, it's now a kind of it has cultural status associated with it. So if you put, I've got the six series of Breaking Bad up there, it's like the collected works of Dickens at this stage.
You talked about the downloading thing. So we don't even have to have a television set anymore, which is why the whole idea of a television license now, that idea is changing. Talk to me a little bit about Netflix and what they have done, how they have changed the viewing status, the viewing way of viewing for us, Roddy.
Well, I mean, I suppose the first thing they've done is, and they've got two kind of outstanding series, of which I guess House of Cards is possibly the one that's best known, but the revamp of Arrested Development is the other. In a kind of an acknowledgement of the way that people are downloading stuff through torrent sites or more legally, they make the entire series available immediately. So if you want to, on the day that it's released rather than broadcast, because that's what it is, released, you can do an immediate, six episode binge, and that's a reflection of, I feel like, the reality of how people are actually, consuming television.
But how does that change, though, how we talk about it? I mean, I remember at school you went in, what did you watch on the telly last night? And we all talked about primary school, secondary school, what we watched on the telly last night. How does the water cooler moment happen then at work if we're watching in the way Roddy has described? All of the episodes of House of Cards all in one go.
Yeah, I think this term binge viewing is really important, again, because it speaks to the idea that we want more of television and that we're our relationship to the medium is less disciplined somehow, that we're taking it in these kind of big ways. But yeah, no, I think also the other thing about downloading is that it serves that function as well. So it's hard to know how people are talking about TV without talking also about social media and how social media are maybe elevating certain aspects of TV into cultural prominence, so that we're supposed to know about something. We may or may not have watched it yet, but we're aware that it's trending. So I think another part of the landscape is how TV and social media are working in tandem to define certain things as being phenomenal or interesting at a particular time.
Yeah, and the social media idea, the idea now, I find it quite hard to do. I don't know how people do it, where they are watching and they are reading Twitter and tweeting at exactly the same time. You can't tweet if you're watching the box set.
No, you can't, because it makes no sense to either, because no
the rest of your tweeters aren't doing it at the same time.
But I think that idea already of a kind of a shared canon is and it's both disappearing and reappearing in different ways. And I had this conversation with my sister last night, who said she wants to watch stuff when it goes out in broadcast television because there's a sense of community when you do that. And she's absolutely right, and that is beginning to disappear. But at the same time, you've got new communities of interest, if you like, that are peer-to-peer communities, basically, that are facilitated through social media, through torrent sites, where people who are from very different, if you like, organic communities, so not all from Ireland, not all from the UK, nonetheless establish connections through Breaking Bad, with people in China, in the United States, and that becomes the kind of the transnational, the global community.
All right, that gives me a really good reason to play a clip from Breaking Bad. I've only watched the first season of this quite recently, in fact. So I'm so far behind in terms of this one. For those who haven't even got as far as I have with us, who will give me the basic setup in Breaking Bad?
Wow. So we have a high school chemistry teacher who finds that his life is well, for one thing, he's given a diagnosis of terminal cancer. And in order to make things secure for his family in financial terms, he decides to use his skills as a chemistry teacher to start cooking crystal meth.
And here the said person is Walt White, played by Bryan Cranston, and he's making a proposal to a former student, Jesse Pinkman, played by Aaron Paul. And this is in the first season, in fact.
Look, I don't know what you think you're doing here, Mrs. White. I mean, if you're planning on giving me some bull wine there about getting right with Jesus or turning myself in.
Not really.
High school was a long time ago. Okay, you ain't welcome back, Carter, so step off. No speeches.
Short speech. You lost your partner today. What's his name? Emilio? Emilio is going to prison. The DEA took all your money, your lab. You got nothing. Square one. But you know the business. And I know the chemistry. I'm thinking maybe you and I could partner up.
You want to cook crystal meth? You and me.
That's right.
Wow.
Either that, or I turn you in.
And that's Walt Whitman, I was going to say. Walt White, played by Bryan Cranston, and Jesse Pinkman, played by Aaron Paul in the opening season, the first season of Breaking Bad. You mentioned there, I think, Roddy, somebody mentioned Love Hate. I don't know how it came into the conversation. That was a series where actually it was about communal viewing in recent times here in Ireland. You had to watch it on the night, really, didn't you?
Yes and no. It's also the most successful box set in Irish television history. RTE have done very well out of it. Last Christmas they sold 58,000 copies. It's both, I think. But it is also the single most successful show that RTE has at the moment. Over 1 million people watched the last episode at the time that it went out, which is quite remarkable.
It also brings up the topic of what are these new series about. For example, Breaking Bad, that we just had the clip from HBO. Home box office. This became, if you didn't watch a HBO series, you were so far behind the pack. This was where you got quality TV. What does quality television, what does that now mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think one of the things that's really clear is that the old status distinction between cinema and TV is breaking down in all kinds of ways. And the sense that, TV used to be the lesser medium. It was aspirational. Just that term, home box office, says we can be as good as the box office. Now, there's something else. I mean, for a long time, those of us who teach television, there was a kind of an idea that if you the highest praise you could give to television was to say it was cinematic. Although people often didn't know what that really meant, or it was a vague kind of term. But I think right now, you see a kind of jostling for position between TV and cinema. And a lot of what makes middle class status these days seems to be a connoisseurship around these kinds of series rather than necessarily something that you've gone to see at the movies.
Yeah, because I think the other aspect of that, perhaps, Roddy, is you've got 6 or 7 episodes. You have them sitting in front of you. So how characters are developed by writers has now changed.
Well, you can obviously do much longer arcs. I mean, and you can stay with a character over 8 years, which, I don't know, sometimes it feels like 8 years. But if you're watching something like The Sopranos, I can't calculate the television hours we're talking about there, but we must be talking about sort of 40 or so hours as opposed to a 2-hour movie. By definition, you can do a lot more with it. I don't necessarily think, though, we've reached a point where there's a tendency to sort of say the television is now better than films. I still think they're just different, as a matter of fact, rather than one being better than the other.
Oh, I remember when I watched that first season of Breaking Bad, I went to the extras when I finally got to the end of season 1, and there was an interesting discussion on there about how the writer is more in control in these new HBO style series. So it gets back to something more like theatre, where the author has primacy. How important is that? And is that common to most of the things we're talking about, Diane?
It is. And I think we are in the age of the showrunner, and we're starting to see maybe just a little bit more diversity in who qualifies for that role. I mean, Scandal in the United States has Shonda Rhimes, a black woman showrunner. She did very well with Grey's Anatomy, and she's now running a second show, equally successful. Lena Dunham, a very young woman, albeit with the creative involvement of Judd Apatow, the film director, has done extremely well with a series like Girls. So my sense is that part of the appetite for quality TV involves a knowledge of who brings us this material.
And how has that changed? Who is bringing it to us?
Well, as I say, the showrunner, the showrunner is an interesting figure in that in cinema studies for a long time we talked about auteur theory, and we sort of said the director is the single most important figure. And then over time it was kind of, oh, hang on, there's all these other people who are involved as well. And I think we might get to that stage with actually the status of the showrunner. Say someone like Stephen Moffat in the BBC, who looks after Doctor Who and Sherlock at the moment, is this kind of godlike deity figure. And yet, if you look at the credits of Doctor Who, there's 100 people and more kind of involved with, and they've all got some kind of kind of role in it. So, I think it's hard to say actually where that kind of creative genius lies. I think it's
Still the collective.
It's diffuse.
Yeah, it's still a collective.
Right, and no running away from this one. Where will we be and how will we be watching television in 5 years' time?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I think the medium will be, the content of television will be even more dispersed than it is. I think my sense is that we're using TV more and more like we used to use iPods. And the sense of playlisting, of being able to customize your own taste preferences, and within narrower and narrower demographics, you alluded to this, Roddy, but this kind of sense that people are recognizing small cultural communities based around taste. I think that trend is probably going to intensify.
And just 10 seconds from you, Roddy.
Well, look, here's the thing. We live in an era of kind of a flexible, kind of lives. People use mobile phones to reorganize everything. And that's what we're doing with television now. We are making television fit around us. People are not watching it at broadcast times nearly as much as they used to. I think that process is going to continue.
Roddy Flynn and Diane Nigra on the new TV frontier.